So a bit about myself. I know a few people say know me, some people don't. If you don't know me, I'm Chris O'Brien, otherwise nicknamed as Cobb because it's just my initials. Everyone calls me Cobb, even in the industry they do. So I've been working at Crimson. I'm going to my 17th year, which is pretty much half my life. Yeah, I first joined Crimson working in IT, developing, networking, so a bit of everything really. I was doing code, was backing up servers. And then sort of ended up in IT recruitment for some years, which I kind of got a bit of a name for myself in a good way. And now recently I've been promoted as head of customer engagement at Crimson. So looking at not just contracts and interims, it's more permanent and also IT solutions, as we're also an IT boutique solution company as well. So Crimson, we've been going for since 2001. We've got revenues to £21 million a year. We're part of the Harvey Nash Group. Recently, actually, I think it's about 4 years ago, Harvey Nash acquired Crimson as part of the group. They wanted a boutique IT agency / solutions provider, which they got, which we now work really well in the group. So we're an IT specialist recruiter. We've got just under 200 UK-wide clients, customers. We're part of a £1 billion global group. We're a Microsoft Gold partner, as a lot of you may know. Our net promote score at the moment is 65 plus, which is way above average. And we currently have got our own IT CRM dynamic software, which we invested £1 million of ourselves in there, just to make ourselves efficient and the best IT recruiter out there, really, with the best data behind the scenes, etc. So we can dive into that offline. And we do IT leadership workshops. We've got a couple this week. We've got a Woman in Tech event this week, which I think there's a few of you that are on the call that are going to, which I can see already. We've got a CIO workshop this week as well. So we do quite a lot. And obviously we've got, today with the Architect Exchange, where we're doing a lot of information sharing and gathering, etc. So swiftly moving on, as I said before, we used to do in the past, but pre-COVID, a lot of workshops with Architect Exchange where we go into a room, hire a room, do a lot of information sharing. We'll get beers, pizzas, and all the rest, and open discussions, very insightful speakers, which brings me on to really, we've got two very fantastic insightful speakers today, two people I know really well. So I'm really honoured that they're going to be speaking about smart cities, which is Dalvinder Singh. I've gone ahead of my time here. Dalvinder Singh is currently at HS2, enterprise architect at HS2. So he talked about what he's done previously, as well as maybe diving into one or two things at HS2, but mainly about what he's done previously about smart cities and what he's done in the councils. And also Carl Walker, who's recently joined Microsoft as technology strategist, talking about smart cities from a Microsoft perspective and technology perspective, as Dal will talk about more the business side. So what does smart cities term mean to you? If you guys want to put anything in the comments or the chat, free to people speaking at the moment, you can do. Also, if you'd like to as well, just for everybody else's sort of information sharing confidence, if you want to put in there, who you are, what your job title is, maybe a little one sentence kind of what you do in the chat, that would be fantastic as well. But as I say, these are the speakers. There's Dalvinder Singh, Senior Enterprise Architect at HS2, over 25 years of enterprise architecture experience. And then I don't go through slides actually too much. But then we've also got Carl Walker, as I say, who's at Microsoft. And I'll just try and get his picture up as well, sorry. And there's, that should come up.
Yeah, it's fine, picture, mate. I'll put my camera on for you and do the job.
Oh, brilliant! Thanks, Carl. It keeps jumping. It keeps jumping back to a certain slide for some reason. So I don't want to. Yeah, it's funny when technology companies have a technology issue.
Yeah, I'd leave it, Chris. Just let the slides flow, and they'll soon be introducing themselves.
Brilliant. So I'm gonna come off presenting mode now. But if you guys want to put in your chat for the first couple of minutes, who you are, what you do, introduce yourself. Just one little line maybe about yourself. You don't have to, and maybe even if you wanted to, maybe put your LinkedIn profile in there as well as information sharing exercise. Because previously as well, when we had the sort of the events where there wasn't virtual, we get a lot of people that would meet each other, and from then on, people have been friends, or they've gone working with that person, or they found information from that person, or they found that person a job. So as it's virtual, we're still hopefully in that networking mode where hopefully people can help each other. Pop your profiles in there, then that'd be great. If not, I know some people at the moment with data protection don't want to do that, but LinkedIn's quite open, so I'm guessing you guys would probably want to do that, going forward. But I'm gonna come off presenting mode now, and I'm gonna pass it over to Del, who's amazing, and then obviously Del will then pass it into Carl. So yeah, thanks guys.
Thanks, Chris. I'm just going to share my slides. Can everyone hear me? I'll take silence and nodding of heads.
Yep, hear you clear. That's
Yes,
great.
definitely.
Okay. So just tell me when the slides come up on screen. Yep. Does that come up, Chris?
Not as yet.
No.
Technology is just a wonderful thing. Okay.
Yeah, we can see those now, Dal.
Fantastic. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining, and let me just start off by thanking Chris and the team just to give me an opportunity to talk about smart cities, something that I'm quite passionate about. So in terms of the presentation, I've only got 15 minutes, so it will be quite brief. So a brief introduction into myself. I'll kick off in a bit. A bit of background into smart cities, and my engagement with the London Borough of Sutton Council, where I entered into this parallel world of smart cities, which I didn't know anything about, and now I'm quite passionate about the work that's been done across the world. And then I'll touch upon a bit of the use cases and benefits that the team who are still there, that I worked with, are trialing. Okay. So a bit about myself. I've got a consulting background. I was quite fortunate when I left university. I landed myself a role with Capgemini. I was there for about 10 years, and fortunate that I was recruited into their enterprise architecture practice. At that time, this is going back 1996, they were thought leaders in enterprise architecture. They had their own framework. Some of you may know IIF. My mentors were contributing to TOGAF. And the good thing about Capgemini is that they've got courses running over in Paris, just east of Paris, should I say, west of Paris, should I say, for a village called Behus, where they take you off every year and teach you about their framework in different modules. And the good thing about that, it was delivered by real life architects across the globe. So as well as the academia, they actually backed it up with experience. So that gave me a really good grounding to enterprise architecture. I worked with their tier 1 clients, and then the last 15 years, I've been independent, currently working, as Chris said, with HS2. And I specialise in consulting, strategy development, enterprise architecture, and I did a stint around smart cities. So why do I want to talk about smart cities? Well, for me, it got to a point where I've been doing enterprise architecture, business architecture, and I did want, I fancied a change, but I wanted to retain my skill set. And it's only when, and I'll talk about the London Borough of Sutton, when I was recruited to do some work, that it sort of opened up around smart cities and this sort of big world that's going in that I had I didn't know anything about. So that was one of the reasons. And I know, enterprise architects like myself, we love talking about frameworks and, functions and capabilities, but I just thought it'd be good, because if there's any architects who do want to sort of enter into smart cities, I would thoroughly recommend it. Okay, a bit of background around smart cities. That's the wiki definition at the top. For me, smart cities is about using smart solutions to tackle urban challenges. Now, I'll mention Barcelona, and that's because when I engaged with London Borough of Sutton, they modelled themselves on the work that was done at Barcelona. So Barcelona was one of the first cities to adapt smart city technologies. I think this was back in about 10 years ago, when the town installed sort of extensive sensor networks. And like most councils, funding was challenging. They wanted to tackle some of their issues around climate, energy, transport. One of the examples that they gave us when we spoke to them was they installed sensors in car parks. So, as most of you know, Barcelona, it attracts a lot of tourism. There was a lot of congestion with tourists hiring vehicles and not knowing where to park. So what they did as part of their work, they partnered with a solution provider to develop this data platform, and then using the Internet of Things like sensors, they started installing sensors around the city. And with the example of the car park, you could download the app, and in real time it would tell you where there'd be a car parking space, and then you could say, okay, well, take me there, and it will direct you there. And they found that reduced congestion around the city. So I think it was quite a good thing that they were doing at the time. I think at the moment there's some kind of expo. I haven't followed it, and I'm sure they've just won an award for some of the work that they're doing. But this is a global thing going on at the moment. Okay, so my engagement with smart cities started with work at London Borough of Sutton Council, who are quite active in this space at the moment. So I was engaged by the chief executive and team, and they brought me in to develop their digital strategy, which is online, although my version may have been superseded. And they sat me down and said, Dalvinder, look, we want to embark on a digital transformation program. That's really to fulfill funding shortages. As most of you know, councils have been struggling around budgets and funding, and they were looking at sort of innovative ways of trying to work through programs and projects to try and, either generate income or save income. And they asked me to develop a digital strategy, which I did. But part of that digital transformation work, was they liked the work that Barcelona had done, and they wanted to model themselves on that. And the reason why this worked for them, and they've just recently, well, I say recently, last couple of years, won about £4 million in funding to trial some of the use cases, which I'll go on to in a bit, is the chief exec and the team were quite ambitious. So they really wanted to sort of introduce this sort of smart city concept into Sutton. So we kicked off the smart city program, and I was fortunate enough, and this is where it opened my eyes, amount of events going around in Manchester, in London, all around. There's a big one in Dubai, and Barcelona, and I was quite excited about it. So in terms of the approach, so what they wanted to do was, one really good thing I liked about the work that they did, because I've got a lot of experience in councils, and sometimes they don't really have a clear visibility of their spend. So Sutton had brought in an independent company to review what they call the review of the Sutton pound. So that gave them an overview of the spend for each area, and then they engaged with each service area to understand their challenges and looked at areas where there was high spend. So whether it was adult social care or transport, environment, they got a good gist of where a lot of the spend was going into from their budget. So what they wanted to do is develop something what they call in smart cities is dilemmas, what we probably know as use cases, to take to market. And at that time, we needed to engage with a partner because we had no experience as a team around smart cities. We knew that Barcelona did something around open procurement, but we also knew there was closed procurement, so we didn't know which way and how to develop these use cases. So we had engagement with a couple of suppliers, Arup being one, Catapult, which you may have heard of, and Perform Green, who I know the director, Barney, who's worked in government, and they've done some fantastic stuff in Bristol, and Catapult are quite active in this area. But having sort of done the initial consultation, we found Arup was the best partner for us to go with. And the guy who we engaged with at Arup was ex-council, you know, and actually Arup had worked with Manchester Council at some point, and then he was recruited on. And so they helped us to sort of prioritise and develop some of these use cases, which we then took to market. And after the advice from Arup, they suggested that we go down through the Crown Commercial Spark framework, which is all around IoT solution providers. So, and what we did is that once we started to get the replies back on the framework, we then sort of worked with some of these suppliers to say, okay, these are our dilemmas and use cases, you know, how would you tackle these going forward? Now, in terms of the work that Sutton have picked at, there's 36 use cases that they're trialing, but I've just picked a handful of examples just to sort of show you how powerful some of this stuff is. Now, one thing I really liked about smart cities is the benefits that it gives you. I've worked in councils where I've tried really hard to help councils to try and save money, but sometimes it is very difficult because it comes down to, okay, we can automate some of your processes, efficiencies, but ultimately what you're going to have to do is let go of some people. But that is a difficult thing within government. This, on the other hand, actually does show you that there's another way of saving money for the council, or even in this example that I'm just going to talk about, saving a life. So one of the areas that Sutton wanted to explore in terms of their dilemmas was independent living. So they trialed a device, and this device, you can just post it through the door. It's a small device. It monitors movement. Some of you may know this already, and you can allocate where the alert goes if there's no movement. So what it does, in the first 48 hours, it maps the typical level of activity inside of a home. And then if that behavior deviates, then it triggers an SMS or an email alert to a nominated person. Now, this actually saved a life, which is showing how powerful this thing can be in terms of smart city solutions. So there was a lady in her 90s who had fallen in the early hours of the morning, and she actually had broken her hip. You know, the sensor had then obviously triggered an SMS or an email, which alerted the nominated individual to then phone the paramedics. And the paramedics said that if we hadn't got that alert in time, you know, she would have actually died. So that shows you how powerful some of these solutions can be. And this is one of the reasons why at this point in my career, I'm quite passionate about sort of exploring more around smart cities and what's happening around the globe. The second example, having spoken to my peer who's still there, like I mentioned earlier, they secured £4 million of funding, is an example around saving money, so flood monitoring. So what they've done is they've deployed some sensors to monitor water levels within drains around the city. And the sensors have been calibrated to understand what the default level of water is, and it can sort of alert the councils to send warning to residents when the levels have been exceeded, which is quite good. So it's preventative flooding. But where they've really saved some money is around contractor maintenance. So before, contractors would go around and save and clear the drains, and one of the biggest culprits, as most of you may know, is the deposit of silt, which solidifies and causes blockages to drains. With this solution, they've partnered with a technology provider. It can actually sort of allow you to do targeted maintenance, so only clear those drains that are actually, require cleaning, whereas before it was just a generic, go around, clean all this, and they were charged accordingly. And the other bit around this as well is that they can actually see if the drains have been cleared correctly, because what it will tell you, the sensor will tell you that this is a default level. After cleaning, it should go back to this default level. So, before, when I was talking to my peer, he was saying, contractors would say, we've cleaned that drain, but actually hadn't been cleaned thoroughly enough. So now they can actually go back and say, can you go back and clean that drain? But the good thing is they've started saving money, because they're only cleaning those drains that need cleaning. So I think that's a real good example of where councils can start saving money. There's lots of other areas as well, but I just wanted to choose this example. The other bit, and the last example I'll give you, is around fly tipping. Now, I know that there's a lot of this around a number of cities, which can be quite a nuisance to residents. But certain councils have actually partnered with Vodafone to start installing cameras and to catch and prevent people from fly tipping. So they have footage which is transmitted to a secure portal, which can be viewed by an enforcement officer from their smartphone, tablet or PC. The solution benefits from AI being a powerful element within smart cities and in other areas of technology, which allows the system to sort of visually map the areas covered. And if there are material waste deposited, it registers this and takes a before and after footage. And in some case, you can actually catch the offenders as well. So the key benefits here is offending has decreased, saving council money, because normally the council would have to go wherever there's fly tipping and then actually remove whatever waste is being deposited there. And you've got cleaner streets and areas and happy residents. So I'll finish there. Thank you for listening. All I want to say is one of the reasons for bringing this to the audience was that what I did find is that I could add a lot of value to the engagement of smart cities through the mindset that we all develop through enterprise architecture, with the framework, some of the principles. I don't see a lot of that, but I think it'll be a good avenue if there's other architects like myself who want to sort of have a slight change from the day-to-day grime of business architecture and enterprise architecture. I want to do something different. Thank you.
Thanks, Dale. That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Any questions on the floor from what Dale's been talking about there with smart city technologies?
I think John's got his hand up.
Bob, John Bowden.
Hi, John.
Hello. Thank you, Devinder. That was a brilliant session. I think I'm very interested in what you presented, and I think as a challenge, and having worked with a number of people in the public sector, I think that the evolution from what you described is at a relatively low maturity level. And one of the things that I try to sort of encourage councils to do, and particularly the public sector, is building on that concept that you've already done and expanding it out to, dare I say it, more customer centric ideas, which is building on those type of ideas that you've already got, but actually rather than focusing on, bottom line stuff, which you touched on already, which is that, how is it going to save the council money? How is it going to save them effort, so that essentially it's politically driven by, we're not charging as much for the council tax and all of that, but actually turning on its head and actually being more customer centric, which is actually what things can I do within the city smart wise to actually improve the lives of individuals, and actually start bringing that forefront, which is building on the idea of saying, great, you can do all of this is, but it isn't about the bottom line. You know, it's about making a difference for people within the city. What can I do to actually change their lives and improve it? I know it's a little bit of a difficulty in getting key stakeholders and sponsors, and particularly lead councillors and politicians in on it. But it's that aspect of going, well, actually, literally, you know, to build a true smart city, you want services and smart technology to actually enhance individuals' lives rather than necessarily providing them with a service. But yeah, I think we'll get there eventually. And I think there are many other cities in the world that people have been to that have seen this. But obviously they have also the counter argument of going, well, actually, if you make things too smart, you're then into complex morals around data privacy and invading in people's lives. You know, you've got other cities in the world that are incredibly invasive individuals on what they do, where they go, because of course you're collecting all this data to improve their lives, but it's being misused, whether it can actually impact people's lives, because essentially, again, politicians and governments start then using that to control individuals.
Yeah, it's a very
interesting concept.
Yeah, it's a very good point, John. The examples that I showed you from Sutton were only 3 of 36. Some of those do sort of pivot on customer centricity. I learned a very valuable lesson years back. I was quite young and naive and quite keen to make an impression, and I did some work in the NHS, and I was driving more around trying to save them money, when the chief executive turned around and says, Dalvinder, for us, it's not about saving money. It's more about, you know, as John said, you know, better quality of life. So I learned a good lesson earlier on. But with Sutton, you're right. There is elements of it, and I think it depends on the country as well in terms of their privacy laws as well. And you know, it varies from country to country, and it's a very good point. But like I said, I couldn't agree more with you, John.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Dale. Anybody else got any more questions? If you do, I'm going to pop them in the chat before we pop over to Carl Walker before he puts on his presentation. Any more any more questions before we're going to pop them in the chat?
I think there's a couple, Chris, on the chat. So I'm just trying to scroll up. There's quite a few.
Okay. I think Laura Lawrence has had a question.
Yeah, so Laura, I'll just read that out. You said the team was inexperienced, and can you explain what was needed? It's a very good question. Yeah, so we were inexperienced. We were experienced in different areas. Like I said, what really helped us was we went to a lot of events. That really helped because we made a lot of contacts. We got to know what other cities were doing. We actually approached some of the providers there. Green was actually at that event, and we said, we love what you do, can we come down and, you know, you could start showcasing what they've done, because they actually built a purpose-built control center. So having going to these events and then partnering with someone like Arup and talking them through, and them coming and showing, you know, how they would approach this, that was really, really helpful. So I would thoroughly recommend you going to some of these events if you can, and then actually then, you know, talking to some of the presenters or solution providers. There's always stalls there, but some of those are very much technology focused, but it's really about getting to the people like Catapult or Perform Green, you know, Arup. They were key providers for us. So I hope that helps. But if you need any more information, anything I can help with, just reach out to me. Chris will give you my details.
That's brilliant. I think there's one more question. I think Paul has put something in there as well.
Okay, so what tech was used for the IoT sensors to record the data and send alerts? Well, unfortunately, that happened post my time. I can certainly find out for you, because what Sutton are doing at the moment, they are just partnered with Digital Catapult to start looking at developing a data platform. And what that will do is those sensors that they've trialing for those 36 use cases, they're going to start collecting that data within this data platform, which they're having built with Digital Catapult. But I can certainly find out, and Nicole may be able to touch upon that because it's going to go into a bit more technology. But I can certainly find out if you need, just give me a shout, and I've still got contacts in Sutton who can give us that information.
Thank you. Thanks, Dale. That's brilliant. Cole, over to you.
Thank you, Cobb. That's a nice intro. I'm just going to remind you, Amazon does deliver beer, so I know you can't do this in person at the minute, but you can send them out. Right, I'm going to go for presenting Teams. Hopefully this is going to work. Let's give it a go. If not, I'll go the old way. It says, can anyone see those coming through yet?
Yeah.
Yeah, super. Thank you.
There we go. We have technology. So, a couple of things about me. I'll talk really fast, so hopefully you can keep up. I'm going to go into a couple of specific details around what we did for smart cities in the City of London. My background, I was the principal architect down at the City of London and the City of London Police for a few years. Before that, I was at Fortune 5, which is where Cobb and a wonderful leader at Crimson, who's also lurking in the chat there, Louise, so how I met them years ago, and then recently joined Microsoft around about 6 months ago now, having worked with them on various projects. My background is actually data center transformations and digital transformations across sort of M365 and things like that, and got into smart cities really with a large program of work, about 18.5 million pounds over 3 years for the program delivery with the City of London Corporation and Police. So I'm going to delve into a few bits and pieces first, and then we'll get into the details, and so we'll go quickly because we'll run out of time as well. So there's a bit of background about me. On the, make sure these slides are coming along with you. Seeing the next slide? Yep, smart city trends.
Yeah, thanks, Cole.
Okay, right, there we go. So I wanted to just set the scene a little bit, actually. Smart cities, buzzwords, what does it mean? And every person you speak to will have a different, they'll have a different viewpoint of what a smart city would be. I'm certainly not going to cover all of the topics today because you need quite a while, and I do like to talk about stuff. But a couple of headline figures, right? So 6.5 billion people are going to be living in cities by 2050. 60% of them will access smart devices some way or somehow. But the key figure I want to keep in your head is that 44 zettabytes. I don't even know what a zettabyte is. I work for Microsoft and I have no clue. It's a big number. I know that.
It sounds good, doesn't it?
What was that? Sorry, Cobb?
It sounds good.
It sounds good, yeah. And it's a great big number, and I don't even know what I can't comprehend trying to build out something that would contain 44 zettabytes of data. Safe to say though, a lot of data is going to start coming through, and that's going to be from IoT devices, going to be from citizen devices, going to be from cameras if you class them as an IoT device, that I kind of do, and all sorts of other data sources that we don't even know yet. It's got to go somewhere. Just staying on the trends and some of the top line figures, the global population is growing. The key one here, again, I want to pick out is the GDP. So 80% of global GDP is now created out of cities instead. Another one of the other topics I'm going to touch on is sustainability towards the end of the slides. Natural resources, 75% of natural resources are consumed within cities. And the list goes on, right? And I can chuck out figures. Well, our research team can chuck out figures all day long. And they're big numbers, big challenges, a lot of thinking to be done, I guess, is a summary. I think, when you look at a connected city, what does it mean? And again, going back to what I said a moment ago, every person will have a different viewpoint of what a smart city is. I don't think we're anywhere near getting to a universal view of what that means. For some, it would be, being able to, buy tickets of devices in the street. Some it could be, and I'm going to use trash can because it's an American slide, from an American company, but the state of waste services within a city. And one of the things that I will touch upon is bridges, specifically from the City of London, street lights. All of these things are going to be internet connected somehow in the future. They're not all there yet, but but it's safe to say that, you know, as technology evolves, you know, we've got to assume that we will keep moving forwards. If we don't, something's gone really wrong. And eventually all of this stuff is going to be available to us to do something more with that's a lot smarter than what we currently do now. And hopefully the outcomes will be, you know, a better experience for, you know, the citizens ultimately. And that could be through service provision or maybe cost savings. So things can be maybe not save money, but they can repurpose that money to deliver other outcomes that are beneficial to citizens as well. Just wanted to touch on this, and this again, there's a lot of text on it. I don't like slides with lots of text on, but I thought I'd drop it in because, you know, when you consider a citizen journey, they've got a huge amounts of touch points, massive amounts of touch points throughout the city, whether it's through requesting services from your local councils, you know, a green bin or, you know, whatever it might be, through to planning your travel, and sort of London, you know, you're looking at the congestion charges and the ultra low emission zones, or Transport for London, or, you know, up in Yorkshire, the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, you know, they've got transport systems and metro systems with M cards that allow citizens to move around freely. They've got bus services that cater to, you know, disabled children and, you know, people on as an advantage as others. So, you know, there's lots of different touch points, and, you know, going through this golden thread, as it were, you know, a citizen will have lots of touch points across the city and a lot of services provision from usually LRG or police forces or something like that. And then when you look at all of those touch points, you can start to build out some scenarios of how you can make a city smart. And I'm certainly not going to touch on all these. There's a whole lot, and I don't know most of them. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to profess that I do. But, you know, you can start putting them into buckets of capability, right? So public safety is the one I will touch upon in a moment. But, you know, stadiums, you know, you've got large stadiums with big problems when you have match days with traffic and, you know, public safety and how do you provision, you know, ticketing and things like that. Parking, I know Dale's just covered that a moment ago, and so on and so forth. There's lots of buckets of capabilities within a city that can make it smart. And again, some people will take some of these and say that's a smart city. Some will take all of them and say it's a smart city. Eventually, we will get to a unified view, I hope. What does that all mean? Lots of figures, lots of slick slides, but ultimately, you know, the issues we've got are really complex and quite difficult to address. You know, I'm not going to read these out for you, and you can have the slides afterwards. But safety concerns is one we'll touch on in a moment. Outdated infrastructure as well. But the usual stuff, you know, traffic is an easy one to kind of put into a smart city of how do we start addressing traffic. But how do you start addressing educational crises or energy consumption, which is obviously a massive topic at the moment, through delivering on the smart part of a smart city? What I do know in my own head is that the power of the cloud, and this is not a sales deck, by the way, so don't turn off just yet. The power of the cloud will be critical to us understanding the problem and dealing with the problem. You know, there's going back to the zettabytes, what I said to keep it in your head, that volume of data you just cannot do in old legacy ways. It's just impossible. It's too much, right? You need the power of the cloud, and you need the power of machine learning to be able to interpret the stuff that you're getting from all these sensors, make sense of it, and actually do something actionable off the back of it to deliver something for a citizen, right? And so, you know, digital information is essential, and as it says at the very top, you know, the cloud will be critical, and we've got to start thinking about how do we get these things into the cloud if they're not already there. So going back to that slide where it's got all of the different parts of a smart city, you've got to, my view is you've got to focus on the design outcomes, and the two that I'll pick up on is safer cities and sustainable cities out of that whole broad landscape, and there are more. So I want to bring it right back down into a case study. And I used to work for the City of London Corporation. It was the Police Authority Board for the City of London Police. And I'm going to run through what we did there and kind of pin it back to the EA functionality and how that fits in, but also right down into a solution architecture as well. So City of London is 1 square mile. How significant can 1 square mile be in the grand scale of things for a smart city? Not very big. Well, it turns out that it's actually pretty significant. Now, if you look at the headline figures here, again, there's loads on here. You can go and Google the hell out of them, but essentially, you know, that 1 square mile employs over 500,000 people. It's a transitory population. This is pre-COVID, by the way. It's probably a lot different now. But, you know, 500,000 people going in and out of a city. That's 1 square mile every day. Your public transport systems and your smart part of the city need to operate really well to allow that volume of people to move around in such a small space, right? It contributes, the square mile contributes a huge amount, more than Birmingham, Leeds and Manchester together, in terms of business rates, just in 1 square mile. You know, financial services, tax credits of 76 billion, 10% of the contribution of tax in the whole of the UK. So that 1 square mile, turns out it is pretty significant, whether we like it or not. There are estimates that back in 2017, it would be different now, I'm sure, is 10% of GDP of the UK came out of the City of London. And so if you look at the vision of the City of London, this is going back to the EA part of it. The vision of the organisation is the City of London to be is the governing body of the square mile and dedicated to making the city a vibrant and thriving city, supporting diverse and sustainable London within a globally successful UK. Lots of words, I know, very, very sort of corporate-y, but ultimately part of that is to make it the most secure and sustainable city on the earth to be able to do business in and to work in. And so that drives from it a load of different avenues to explore of how you make that a sustainable place to continue doing business. And the safety bit comes in, especially within London, and you can all understand why it'd be critical to make sure that that smart city works. Is that when you take that vision and you put it into an EA, you know, function, and you know everyone will have different EA functions, but you know within the city, you know, you take the business requirements, you got the vision at the top there, and you'll have multiple aims within that, with the multiple outcomes, with the different strategies and different plans. And then you can get down into the weeds of, you know, the technical parts of it within IT. So you take these business requirements from the high level organization, drop them into opportunities that can then be distilled down into solutions, options, it can be distilled down further to HLDs, to LLDs, and then get it built and get it out the door and start delivering on this, right? And that's how, you know, simplistically, I can see you can get from a vision of the most sustainable and successful city to do business in, that's secure and you feel safe to go to, through to the very top there, through to how do we actually deliver something that gets back to it. And so let's just use one use case here. And these words, I've had to change them because I don't want to just copy and paste from the city, but the vision is true. The vision is the correct vision there. The aim, provide the safest working environment in the world, with the outcome of being a digitally connected smart city utilising technology. And all of these have underpinning documents that go with it, championing and facilitating world-leading working environments. And then you can start pinning this to the divisional strategies. And IT is just one division that you'd have a HR function that would align to that vision, and you'd have a finance team that align to the vision and so on. But from IT specifically, digital transformation between a set period, you know, then from that strategy, you then have your opportunities, right? So we can go and put in a high, and this is where I'm going to get right into the detail of something that went in that helps that longer term vision of secure city, a smart city, is that a high resolution video management system with video analytics goes into your LLDs. And this is all stuff that as EAs you'll be familiar with, right? These are all the terminologies and things. But that process, I wanted to really distill it down to a simple point of there's the vision, that's what we want to do, this is how we're going to get to it. So what do we do? Well, you know, City, from the years ago in the IRA bombings, they had the Ring of Steel. It's well publicised on the internet, where they cut off a load of the access avenues into the city, and they put CCTV and ANPR and all that sort of stuff in. And that was way back in the day. And that infrastructure is very legacy, sort of analog cameras and so on and so forth. And so we started to look through to say, well, you know, as we move forward, do we want to go down the route of using legacy data centers and building out the infrastructure ourselves, going back to the I don't even remember what it's called, zettabytes of storage? Well, how do you build a storage array that can start taking that volume of data? And certainly, how do you build it and still remain sustainable? Because that's really tough. We don't want to be beholden to like legacy telcos that make us use their own connectivity, and it costs us a fortune, you know, whether you're into RS lines or whatever it might be. We didn't want a single vendor either, and that ecosystem needed to be open so we could get more data out of it and integrate into other stuff, provide a better experience. So we started along the route, and to be clear, there was no off-the-shelf solution for this, and this is where it gets difficult, because we couldn't go to a supplier and say we want to deliver, cloud-based CCTV and video analytics for a reasonable cost using native tooling. They just didn't exist, and we certainly didn't want to use MPLS and things like that. We wanted to use SD-WAN, and so when we spoke to the vendors and went out to tender, it was very clear that the market wasn't mature. And that's why we started working with a particular vendor that went away and said, you know what, we're gonna step up to challenge, and we will rewrite the core of our solution to be native to, and I'll use Azure. I work for Microsoft now, so I'm going to mention the name Azure Blob Storage. And the volumes are large, right? A petabyte and a half of data per month coming from these 4K cameras, hundreds and hundreds of them around the square mile, keeping you safe. Now that in itself isn't particularly interesting, taking CCTV footage. The volumes are pretty impressive, I would say. But then how do you start looking at making that cost effective? You can't store all that data hot, so how do we tier it down? And you've got native tools, but they also worked with their software they work with us in partnership with us to make it happen. We wanted to get rid of the MPLSs and the lease lines and speciality circuits that these vendors told us we needed to have. Realistically, we didn't want that. We wanted to be able to use SD-WAN and use any vendor at all. And I'll give you a prime example, right? So one of the bridges in London had BT at one end, no BT at the other. And the only way to get BT in was to do a 300+ meter dig on the bridge. Now, I don't know if you ever tried to close a bridge in central London. It's pretty difficult, right? And so they had Colt at the other end. Now, if we'd have been in a traditional position with the vendors, well, we wouldn't have been able to get the resiliency. And this is a critical bridge, right? Whereas, because we changed our thinking to say we want to be agnostic, and again, none of this is rocket science, but because we were just a bit more militant, saying this is our vision and this is how we're going to get there, you have to play nicely or don't play at all, basically. And they went away, and we had this solution that now natively can use any connectivity, even 4G. So if you've got an event and you want temporary connectivity with a temporary camera, you can go and blast it up on a telegraph pole or a light or a lighting column, put it up for a week and then take it back down and use a SIM card if you want. That solution will work for all of that. The other thing we did is street Wi-Fi, and going back to the public safety, officers in the street going out to an incident, whatever that might be, or however serious, wouldn't it be great if they could actually see what they're going into before they get there, especially if it's a particularly dangerous environment? And so looking at how we can get Wi-Fi in. So all of the street lamps within City of London now have Wi-Fi broadcast from them. So you go to the square mile now, you get out your smartphone, you'll see City Guest. You can join that. But similarly, officers' phones can now connect to all those lampposts. They did obviously got cell signal, but with big tall buildings, cell signal is not always that reliable. But a lamppost that's a few meters above your head is pretty reliable. And so they can start using that to provide a better experience, not just for officers and safety, but for the citizens. What comes next? Lots of stuff, right? Bridges, go back to the bridges, IoT devices. So think of one of the problems, I say problems, that's the wrong word, but one of the challenges is, people that are looking to jump off a bridge, and how do we start making it so that those people that are in a particularly difficult position in their life where they feel like they want to jump into the Thames, how can we try and save them? And IoT devices and cameras and video analytics start saying, well, that person's displaying, a regular behavior on a bridge. Let's go and get an officer to go and have a look, and maybe have a chat with them, see what the problem is, and try and help that person along. Similarly, if they do notice that an IoT device is someone's gone into the Thames, whether it's intentional or not, let's look at how we can start building out an ecosystem to get the lifeboats on their way. In the depths of winter in the Thames, you've only got seconds in realistic terms to get something on the way to save that person's life. And that's where the public safety bit comes in. And that I'm quite passionate about, how we can keep developing out on the infrastructure we build to then deliver on those public safety elements. So there's a real world example of something that we've done that's only one tiny part of a much larger ecosystem of secure cities and smart cities. The other bit, very quickly, and Cobb, turn me off, mute me when I'm talking for too long, but sustainability, and this is a really quick piece, right? Going back to the data, if you're going to try and build a data center with however many zettabytes that is, you're going to struggle. I know I've built data centers, quite a few of them. And so if you try and make your on-prem or your current colo data centers sustainable, it's going to be tough, right? And because sustainability isn't just about, you know, energy, it's about recycling, it's about water, it's about all sorts of topics that come in. And so this is the Microsoft journey, and I'd like to think that a lot of people are, you know, looking at it seriously. You know, there's from back here when they've got first goals to reduce it, all the way through to, you know, removing historic carbon emissions. You know, there's a really clear journey, and the cloud is where this really does help. And there's a certain police force I'm working with at the moment where sustainability, they've got a net zero pledge for 2030. And what they realise is they can't do it on-prem. They just can't do it. Whether they can get the green energy from suppliers or not, how do you get the recycle, the return cycle of old kit? You know, and even if they did have that return cycle, you know, is the energy they're getting going to be fully green? And that's where Microsoft have got a pledge. And it's not just a pledge; they're trying to make it actionable. That the energy they use will be net zero by 2030, and they will remove all historic emissions by 2050. So by actually moving to these smart cities, you can start to achieve some of your sustainability goals, is the key point from that. You know, and there's the pledges, you know, carbon negative, water positive, zero waste. And these are sales slides. I do apologise, but there was a couple of, I've deleted most of them, but this one here, you know, moving on premises data centres can, with a little asterisk, of course, but reduce your carbon footprint drastically. And the second one, which specifically around smart buildings, you know, annual energy usage by moving and making these buildings more efficient. And there's some real stats and figures, and I'm not going to read this out to you. I'd rather just link the deck so you can have a read through. I guess the final point, you know, smart cities are tough. You've got to push the boundaries. There will be a ton of no's. There'll be a load of companies that say you can't do this, or we've done it this way because we always have. There'll be lots of people saying it's just, you can't do that. I think the reality is, you know, as technology people, we've got to keep pushing forward, allow those dreams to push through, the visions to push through, and hopefully move to a more sustainable and secure and connected city. So that's me done, and there's a lot to unpack. Happy to take any questions, or just mute me if you want, Cobb.
No, that was fantastic, and it followed on bringing it from Dan actually in a different perspective. Even though you did mention about obviously sustainability, the eco side of things, even the saving lives part, which obviously you're both passionate about, which I think we all are, which is great. You know, and it's a real, looks like a real bright future, doesn't it, in smart cities? Really powerful stuff. I've got a question, but I want to probably take it to the floor first. If anyone else got any questions that they want to probably bring it up, put it in the chat if you don't want to speak. But
be gentle.
There you go, John. Do you want to ask you a question?
Yeah, Carl, I echo Chris. Your comment there is it's a great follow-on for this. I mean, I would probably suspect, seeing from your slides, Carl, that you could probably keep going on this subject. I mean, it's such an infinitesimal, deep subject that you can really sort of get in, and I think couples with the stuff that Devinder mentioned, you know, this element of, you know, the Internet of Things and devices, which you know, just as it says on the tin, just do things that you can make so much more use of. But I think the other aspect which you covered in your presentation, Carl, is the, you know, the amount of data that we have as a sort of a society consume is just becoming larger and larger. Is the amount of information that we collect, not generally or historically have been generally related to business, but also have now sort of evolved into, you know, how we live as human beings, and that is just incredibly valuable. And the more obviously you use that data to pick up on that, you know, and it picks up on the question that I think I posed to you, Devinder, which is, you know, how can you make better use of that and building on it, but whilst I think focusing on the fact that you should really use it for the purposes of evolving human beings and the way that we use, and use it to the betterment of our as individuals, rather than having aspects which I think you covered on here of commercial gain, and I think that's a whole different evolution that is predominantly only at the moment reserved to science fiction, type programs of this concept of actually personal gain and financial wealth become effectively irrelevant from this concept when it gets to a far more evolved version of what we're talking about today.
The financial, I mean, clearly there's commercials all through this, whether it's a Microsoft thing in this particular example or another supplier, but if you get, that's why I didn't touch on costs here, other than saying that the program volume, there is a saving there. I'm not going to use that as a bargaining point, actually, because if we can get a more sustainable place to live that makes the citizen experience better, then who puts a price on that? Where's the value? Saving that it cost us this and we're now spending this, it's kind of irrelevant if the citizen experience has gone up by tenfold. it doesn't really matter. And I get that's easy to say without getting the business cases and the cash behind you to do it. But that's that. I don't like to focus on that specifically, because there are bigger, more valuable things that citizens can get out of a smart city.
Any more questions?
Say, Carl, hi, it's Mark Fisk. I did some work with the Corporation of London on the street lighting and the heating at the Barbican. And I think the challenge the local authorities have got, and some of you guys, you, Devinder, have highlighted quite well, is that I think the keenness is there to move the technology platforms forward. I think the challenge they've got is historically everything goes end of life before they replace it. And I think with the tech and where we're moving with data and everything else, I think the challenge they've got is they probably want to be bleeding edge, but they're going to have to kind of move forward at a faster rate, a pace to keep up with it, because the challenge I found working with the Corporation of London was that the ambition was there, the willingness was there, but culturally they weren't quite ready for it. And as you say, a lot of people wed to legacy platforms, and they've always known it. And we used to use a product called Cyclo Control, which used the radio tele switch on radio 4 frequencies for switching the lights on and off. And it was hard, but I think, like I say, the younger generation coming through have got the ambition and the willingness. It's just that cultural challenge at the moment of people really adopting it and able to keep up with the pace of it, but not letting it go end of life as well.
Yeah, and I agree that the cultures are a big thing. I'm not so sure whether it's just the culture. I think sometimes everyone's very busy with stuff, and how do you skill up workforces to understand this, let alone take advantage of it and actually go ahead and deliver it? I don't know where the public sector is geared up actually entirely. This is my personal view, to be that visionary. Sometimes it's probably not for a lot of public sector workers. I guess the only hope we've got then at that position is the Gen Zs are coming through. The Gen Zs are going to show us all how old we are, and they're going to be demanding this stuff, right? They're going to insist on the city having X, Y, Z, and it being a secure place to go, because otherwise you just won't go there, and that's going to have a real knock-on effect to revenues to a city, right? So maybe we do let the TikTok generation save us all. I don't know.
We've got a few more questions in the chat as well. Thanks for that, Mark, and thanks, Carl. We've got a few more questions here. So I think there's 3 actually. James Cooper was the first. I think it was actually reference to Dell. I'm just going to scroll back up. Sorry. Hi, Dell. Great presentation. Do you know how was the program at Sutton funded? Was there external funders, e.g., central government grants?
Yeah, I've already responded to.
Oh, have you? No problem.
Yeah, I've done it. But basically, I think if memory serves me right, I think they went to a government organisation for funding. There was actually a grant that was allocated, which they competed for. They put the business case forward and got accepted and won 4 million.
Cool. Thank you. Cheers, Dale. Thank you. There's one from Jonathan Ralph as well. I don't know if anyone can see it. Can you see that, Carl? I think that might be a reference to you, I guess. Given there are a couple of people with low or no digital skills that could get left behind, should we be more actively looking for transport ways for smart cities to happen rather than the old? There's an app for that attitude. Yeah,
I think my personal view is I don't think there's a clear route yet for a smart city, because there's no clear definition. It's so vast. Around the skilling, and again touching upon what I just said a moment ago to Mark, was that skilling is a big problem in the public sector, full stop, whether it's smart cities and technology or anything else. And we've got to hold, Microsoft is key to that, as well as, you're the big technology companies around enabling people to skill up. And certainly what I know is that, we're putting a lot of effort into the sectors that I work in, for providing skills and upskilling and pathways, learning pathways. But the harsh reality to me, again, this is not an official Microsoft view, but harsh reality to me is you can lead a horse to water and all that, right? You can give as much training as you want, but not everyone will take it. And, that's, I don't know how you address that, unfortunately, but, we can keep providing training. You can provide the visionary piece. You can show demos. Some people have got to be, a little bit more ballsy and take the first step, and, I know it's public money, but, if you don't invest anything in innovation and just go with the status quo, you'll never move forward. So that's not really an answer, I know, sorry, but
no, it's kind of. I think we're all.
Chris, I don't know whether there's it's Lou here. Just on that point, and hearing both Dal and Carl's presentation. Sorry, we're in the office, it's busy today. What was really poignant to me was the humanization of it all. So obviously Carl referenced, saving lives, so did Dalvinda, but actually, it's like anything, isn't it? If the community and the public see the advancements and the improvements being made to their cities and can be proud of those, it will then drive the right behaviours to allow for more community, culture, spirit to really sort of pick that all up. And actually, when the pandemic was out, my kids are very fortunate. They had their tech at home to be able to jump straight onto their homework, etc., etc. And as a parent, I was sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, think of all those children who don't have access to the tech that my kids do. They are literally now having a break. And obviously, there's a completely different subject and issue altogether anyway, isn't it, in terms of, different different home lives and etc. But I was thinking myself about, village halls and, churches and the community buildings that we have, that if you set those up with certain access points of tech and allow them for this public, almost open source type, sort of setup, in addition to all the technology that's working in a smart capacity with people with their smart devices, 60%, I think Carl quoted, in the future. If you then accompany that, or the public sector and the government accompanies that with these community driven tech projects as well, that could hopefully reduce the risk of alienating at least a certain percentage of people. And that was just my thought when I was listening to all of that, really. Thank you.
That's a great point. That's a good point, actually. That's really good. I don't know whether Dal or Carl want to dive into any of that, but it's a good point. It was a good takeaway, really, and obviously you're forward thinking, aren't you, about the next steps, about the kids and stuff, and the next generation, and obviously local community. So that's a really good point.
Yeah, I think there is thoughts around that, only from my experience and what Sutton was trying to do. One of the things we did recommend, just going back to the earlier observation from Mark, one of the recommendations, I'm not sure if it actually got implemented, but part of the implementation plan for Sutton was to have a dedicated function that would work and be recruited just around digital. So they didn't have, you're right, they didn't have the skill set in-house. There was some keenness expressed, but ultimately, I think if it did go ahead, they would have recruited for these particular roles, which they didn't have. They had no concept, and some of the councils will get left behind. I know money shouldn't be, but it was a big issue when I was engaged with Sutton because of the funding shortages, and I had just come across from another council who was facing £67 million funding shortage. So they had to be quite clever. But the coming back to, was it Louise who just
Louise, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that with Sutton, just because I can use that example, they had a lot of space that wasn't used in their libraries. So they had this concept of digital buddies, where community could come in. They set up some kiosks as well for to sort of help and support them, to people who you know, like my parents, you know, they don't know how to use the internet, you know, they're quite old fashioned, they still carry cash, you know. So I think they are waking up to, you know, more customer centricity and helping. How far they go, I don't really know at this point in time, but I think the motivation and the appetite is there. It's just not how to go there.
Yeah, we'll get there. Thank you.
That's brilliant. I've got one question actually to wrap it up. But I wondered, this is what I'd put then. What does the future of smart cities look like from maybe, I don't know, maybe what Dal thinks or Carl thinks from Microsoft perspective, or pure councils. But what do you think the future of smart cities look like? It's quite a bit of an open question, really, isn't it? Quite a big, broad one.
It is. It's quite a difficult one, only because I am working, and unfortunately I can't talk about the work that's going on at HS2 and God knows why. But I work with an IoT expert, and there's talks about digital twin. You know, that's a big concept now. So it's moving quite fast. But the IoT expert was saying to me, because Dalvinder, one of the challenges around all this is that there's no standards, especially in IoT. There's a lack of standards. So probably where we were in the IT industry, maybe, I don't know, 15, 20, 25 years ago, where some of the big players started to get together and agree some of the standards. I think that is something that would hold back some of the smart city development. But I think if you look at some of the smart city evolution, whether it's Singapore or Barcelona, Dubai is a really good example. And like I said to you earlier, excuse me, there's really good examples of how fast and smart these guys are working, whether it's in transport, you know, and they benefit from, you know, not having the bureaucracy that some countries have, so they can implement something, you know, very quickly. And I think that's something that could hold back smart cities. So I can't really say where we would be. I mean, tech's moving really, really fast. But I think those are some of the challenges. Probably doesn't answer your question, Chris.
It was quite a broad question, to be honest. So it's kind of got a keeping it on your toes sort of question. But is there any more questions? And actually, John's got his hand up. Sorry, John. Do you want to ask a question there to Carl or Dal?
No, I think he was just picking up on something that Jonathan had covered earlier, which is that, and I think it's a very good point on aspect of making sure that we don't leave people behind. And I think this is sort of picking up on where I was saying before, is that, you know, the evolution of the concepts that you know are being presented today is also acutely aware that, and I think across the board with this aspect of being, you know, technology as something that as human beings we have to learn to use. The next evolution of this is actually a technology that we don't have to use, i.e. that just integrates with what we do as human beings. That's a whole different, you know, aspect of, you know, an evolution and probably a subject that goes into true customer centric architecture, which is not what somebody wants when they want it, it's something what somebody needs when they need it, which is entirely two different thought concepts. And if we as a sort of a global technology can evolve that way, then that ensures that people that haven't got the skills or ability to be able to do that aren't left behind. They just use it. It integrates with their life. They don't have to learn to use the technology. It just becomes intrinsically integrated with the way that they want to live their life.
Yeah, I think there's a sense of frustration, you know, from the public, because if I take my example, you know, I'm so used to now ordering stuff from Amazon and getting it delivered the next day, you know, other services, and I think the public sector, you know, they want to, you know, they want to sort of mirror that as much as they can, because, you know, as a citizen, you know, I have that same sort of expectation, you know, wrongly or rightly, you know, because of the service I'm receiving, you know, from the likes of Amazon or other stuff. I kind of expect that when I engage with my local council. Whether I get it or not, that's a different question. But, you know, I think there's a sense of frustration as well. So I think, you know, they are going to have to work on becoming more customer centric, becoming, you know, making their services more accessible. I know there's some good stuff being done, you know, traditionally about bringing services online. It's a lot of hard work because there's a lot of legacy systems. There's a lot of data that's not there, and you really have to start from the ground and work through stuff, you know, and use your experience to the best of your knowledge to try and get to that place. But there's a lot of work to come yet in, I think, for the public sector.
Awesome. I think that wraps it up nicely. I was trying to get to the hour, but to be honest, there's a lot of information there, and it was really,
I think we could carry on all afternoon. It's so
we could actually.
So
yeah, we could. I think a few people had to go off, didn't they? Like 1 o'clock meetings and stuff, and lunchtimes and stuff. But you know, we could actually have another couple of hours talking, debating about smart cities, and it's quite trendy, isn't it? As well, you know, obviously with say COP26 going on at the moment recently, and sustainability is such a big thing. Eco. I've got a hybrid car. You know, I wouldn't have thought I'd ever had one, but we've got now plugins in the office. It's, you know, there's all these smart things that are going on, and you know, it helps the environment, and you've seen even the kids at school. And I think even going back to, I was watching some last weekend, and every soap, I think there's something like 13 soaps in the UK, in last week and this week, are including anything to do with sustainability and eco trends and COP26. Even like a kid wearing a cap with like COP26 or something on it, just to try and, you know, you know, kind of give that message to people that this is actually happening and this is the future of the kids and etc. But this is really good, and it will be on YouTube. Slides are there. Cole and Dow, absolutely fantastic. I really appreciate your help, and Holly as well, behind the scenes. Anybody wants any more advice? If it's market advice around IT recruitment, there's or salary information or CV advice or any news events. We've got loads more events that Crimson doing throughout the next calendar year as well. We've got some this week as well. But yeah, there's a few QR codes that can send you straight to that as well. Or just drop myself a message, drop anyone a message in the chat as well. We're all pretty open and pretty friendly bunch. But yeah, thanks very much. I really appreciate everything, and you know, look forward to speaking to you guys again. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
Cheers. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
And cheers.